Over the past 10 or so years, Xenoblade Chronicles has cemented itself as one of Nintendo's best ongoing series, and with the era of the Switch 2 just beginning now, we are inevitably going to see a new entry at some point in the coming years. The prospect of a brand new Xenoblade game on new hardware is exciting for countless reasons, but ask any fan and they'll probably tell you that they're most looking forward to a new story. It's the heart of the series after all. To add to this, ever since the reveal of Xenoblade 3 back in 2022, it's been no secret that the series also has some overarching lore that connects each game to one another, and the more recent entries have put a big focus on this, giving tons of cryptic hints at what's to come. With the suggestion that future games are going to continue with this interlinked story, the biggest question that most of the community has going into this next mainline game is how is it going to connect to the rest of the series? And that kind of worries me. To be specific, it kind of worries me that the main focus of Xenoblade 4, or whatever it's called, is going to be about the Xenoblade cinematic universe, as opposed to telling its own, more thought out and concise story. Now, that may come off as some really harsh and baseless concerns, especially considering the game hasn't even been announced yet, but I promise I have my reasons for thinking this way based on the more recent releases. And today, I want to talk about why I personally think this could be a really risky direction for the series to go in. But before all that, it's kind of hard to talk about this topic without spoiling a bunch of stuff, so I'm just going to put an entire series spoiler here. I'll be talking about every Xenoblade game, including all the DLC and side stories. So if you haven't finished one of them, maybe come back later. Alright, first off, I want to say that I don't think what they've done so far in terms of building the big Xenoblade universe is bad. As a matter of fact, I think everything within the mainline trilogy is pretty much perfect. I love how it all comes back around to the Conduit and Klaus's initial mistake, and I think it wraps up very nicely after Future Redeemed. But they clearly have intentions of continuing to connect it all in future games, as evidenced from the more recent entries and their somewhat open-ended endings. Can I say that? Namely, Xenoblade X Definitive Edition's new ending. I don't necessarily think that if they continue with this route in future stories that it will for sure lead to disaster, but I do think there's inherently some downsides that come with writing a conjoined, multiverse-esque story like this that I think can be really hard to avoid. The most obvious one in my eyes is a bigger barrier to entry for newcomers to the series. Xenoblade is a pretty long franchise now with a ton of different stories to catch up on, and if Xenoblade 4 continues off of the old games, then people will have to play them first, which can not only be daunting for new players, but it would also immediately take the attention away from the new game. Especially considering Nintendo loves to keep their games at full price, I wouldn't call the series very welcoming for newcomers. Xenoblade 3 is a perfect example of this, where you can definitely play it without having played the other games and still really enjoy the story, but you're missing a huge part of the experience in my opinion if you don't know who some of the characters are or where they come from. Like, if someone told me they were interested in the series, I would never tell them to play Xenoblade 3 first, due to how many callbacks there are to 1 and 2, despite it being my personal favorite of the three. Like, you have KOS, which is based on the races from the Xenoblade 1 world. There's Agyan soldiers who are based on the races from each location, and they all have magic crystals we found in City of Marian's Ricky's fucking hammer thing is here too, I guess. It can be a lot, even when you're only considering the Xenoblade series. But if Xenosaga or Xenogears become relevant to the plot as well, as it was sort of hinted in Future Redeemed, then that could make this point even more relevant. I should point out I haven't actually played Xenosaga yet, and although I fully intend to at some point, because of how inaccessible the games are and how long they are, I think even I personally wouldn't really want it to come back and be a big part of the Xenoblade canon. Maybe once I play the games, my mind would change about that, but I still stand by that it would just make the series very difficult to get into today. I think it would be cool if Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3 have their own story, and then eventually, like 4, 5, and 6 tell their own separate story, but trying to connect it all would be way too much. Basically, I want as many people as possible to get excited for and play these games, and if players feel like they need to play the previous titles to really enjoy the new one, then I worry it will lead to people not being interested at all, which, like I said, is definitely a sentiment that I would understand. Sort of on the topic of Xenosaga, it's been a really big point of discussion recently within the community, namely how it will connect with the Blade games. The radio and the star that appear at the end of Future Redeemed did heavily imply that Xenosaga will have some kind of importance in later games. Or it was just an insane Easter egg that Takahashi thought would be a funny prank. Maybe it was all just a dream. But I think the fact that almost every Xenoblade 4 discussion video I've seen brings up KOS-MOS in some way goes to show you that people want to see Xenosaga be a plot point in the next Xenoblade game. It could genuinely just be an Easter egg, but because so many people are now almost expecting it, it might lead to disappointment if it doesn't actually happen. Again, I haven't played Saga, so I can't comment on if something like KOS-MOS returning would be a good storytelling decision, but I do think there's a chance that bringing back certain characters or plot points like that could take away from the main plot of the next game, sort of like how it did in Xenoblade 3 and Future Redeemed. Now wait, please, God, hear me out. I know I just pissed off at least 90% of you, and I'm sorry, but hear me out. Especially with the base game, all of the crossovers and connections actually led to some disappointment from fans when the game was initially released. Some of you might remember, but people were upset at the lack of Xenoblade 1 and 2 representation in the game, especially after all the trailers. People wanted to see Shulk, Rex, Pyra, Dunban, Juju's Buggy all be a part of the story, and although we got to see Melia and Nia, and eventually Shulk and Rex, it took away from the experience for a lot of players.
The story can stand on its own, right? And the music's beautiful. But I think it's a bummer that there were so many other Xenoblade 1 and Xenoblade 2 things that they could have included in the story and had as part of it that are just kind of thrown to the wayside. All of that stuff with Rex and Pyra and Mithra and Nia, all of it at the ending should have been included as part of the plot. And the stuff with the Monado should have been included as part of the plot with Melia as well. The fact that that's relegated to the ending, to me, is like not a good choice.
Nowadays, this complaint is basically non-existent, and people appreciate the story for what it is, but I think it is worth pointing out that those kinds of expectations can seriously affect your first playthrough. In this case, I think it might have been more of a marketing problem rather than an actual content problem. They did kind of make it seem like there would be more crossover than there actually was, but even in Future Redeemed, where we pretty much knew exactly what we were getting into, the discussion surrounding the story was almost exclusively about the connections for a while. Which, I mean, obviously, I don't blame you, look at my boys. But there are some amazing scenes in Future Redeemed, especially near the end, that I think deserve just a little bit more discussion than they got initially. I want to reiterate that these games are amazing. They are truly peak, including the fact that they culminate the stories of Xenoblade 1 and 2. I'm not trying to say that what they did was bad, I'm just trying to emphasize that when you include characters, areas, or concepts from previous games as plot points, it's going to become a huge focus for fans, whether that was the intention or not, which in some cases can distract from other important parts of the game. Anyways, that's a lot of ramble for a relatively small point, at least in terms of how it affected Xenoblade 3. But I think this kind of thing had a way bigger impact on Xenoblade X Definitive Edition's new ending. The more I think about it and the more I see other people's takes, the more I find the new Chapter 13 to be really weird. Like, I can't imagine this was their original vision for the end of the story back in 2015, and I think a part of that is because this time around they were trying to force a direct connection between Xenoblade X and the mainline games. The entire point of the story completely shifts at Chapter 13, going from surviving on a new planet and figuring out its mysteries to abandoning it and moving to what I can only assume is Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3's universe. Although even that's a little unclear at the moment. I assumed it was the same world, but I've seen a lot of people say it's not due to the ring around this new world. Either way, it's a complete shift from the rest of the story for some strange reason. Whereas I found Xenoblade 3 and Future Redeemed's connections to be very tasteful and relevant to the plot, this feels like they did it just because they wanted it to be somewhat related to the mainline games, whether that's 1, 2, and 3 or a future game. I was actually pretty on board with how it all connected during Act 2 when Al was explaining his dimension hopping experience. Klaus mentioned there are other universes out there, Al got sucked into the in-between zone of all the dimensions, which is why we saw Shulk, Rex, and Noah in all of them, and now they're in their own dimension separate from the mainline games. I think that's actually pretty cool and makes a lot of sense for the lore, but it really bugs me that they just moved to another universe, completely disregarding everything that happened in chapters 1 to 12. Maybe it's just because I used to be a huge MCU fan and they kind of screwed that up in a similar way, but I personally just don't want the plots of future Xenoblade games to be focused around connecting each game. Again, I'm not saying that kind of storytelling is always bad. As a matter of fact, I think the end of Xenoblade 2, where you find out that Allrest is a parallel world to Xenoblade 1, and you hear Shulk's voice coming through the portal right before he kills Zanza, is unbelievably well done. To this day, I have never seen a cooler, more mind-blowing plot twist in my entire life. It might actually be my favorite Xenoblade memory. But part of what makes it so great is that it doesn't take away from the rest of Xenoblade 2 in the slightest. It was unexpected, relevant to the plot, and a neat nod to the previous game, but it required a very long and specific setup that I don't think works at all if it's forced, sort of like how it felt in Xenoblade X's Chapter 13. Once again, I'm not saying that any of this is for sure gonna happen, or that it would completely ruin a future game. I'm just stating my concerns based on trends that I've noticed, and if you're someone who wants a more connected story, then please don't let me ruin your hype or enjoyment. I promise no matter what, I'll probably be pogging at the screen with the rest of you. The multiple universe storyline is extremely cool, but I think I miss the more self-contained stories like Xenoblade 1's, and I'm ready to see something completely new. Takahashi has even said himself that Xenoblade 3 and Future Redeemed mark the end of the saga. He says it's a great stopping point for the series, and I 100% agree. If I had it my way, I think the best case scenario is if Xenoblade 4 is completely separate from the original trilogy or X. You could even give it a new name or something, but I would love to see completely new characters, worlds, and concepts. I think you can do that without taking away that core Xenoblade identity. If they have to connect it, which seems likely, I would honestly be fine if it took place on the merged world that we saw at the end of Future Redeemed, but like thousands of years later so that it feels fresh. Sort of like I mentioned earlier, I also think it would be cool if it was in one of those alternate dimensions that Klaus talked about. As long as at some point they explained what the conduit is and stuff, and as long as the story doesn't revolve around the multiverse or whatever, I think it would be cool. Also, if the DLC stories want to connect the games and bring back old characters, then I think that's 100% fine. I actually encourage it. Hardcore fans are going to be the majority of players who play the DLC anyways, so I think that's probably the perfect place to do it. Lastly, if they do end up doing a fully connected story that involved the plot and characters from the previous games, which again seems very likely, I hope they explicitly explain that before release. Tell everyone that it is a sequel to Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3, and maybe re-explain some of the important plot points again at some point in the game. I would also hope that it then gives well thought out and satisfying answers to any and all questions that the game provides. I have so much faith in Monolith Soft that no matter what, I'm sure their next game is going to be a banger. The visuals alone are going to be to die for, but personally, I would love it if Xenoblade 4 moved away from the previously known stories, giving it a fresh start, especially to go along with the new console and all. And hopefully the series can grow even better and reach even more people. Obviously, my opinion is an end-all be-all, so please don't take what I say to heart if you disagree. Do you like the games all being connected? And would you want that to be a focus in the next game? I read every comment, and I'm actually really curious what other people think about this, so let me know what you would want out of Xenoblade 4. Thanks so much for watching.